Hey there, I am Barb Higgins, and this is 1,000 Tiny Steps. In this podcast, I share my stories of love, loss, triumph, and tragedy as I continue to retrace my steps and ponder what led to the death of my daughter Molly. By doing so, I hope to not only help myself, but to bring purpose and possibility to those who listen. If you are ready to laugh, cry, shake your head in disbelief, then tie, buckle, face up, or slip on your shoes and join me as we begin our 1,000 Tiny Steps. Hey everybody, Barb Higgins here, welcoming you to episode 165 of 1,000 Tiny Steps. So, as with anything in life, what we think is black and white is seldom black and white. There are very few things that I have found as I started this season on lies and truth that are 100% true or lies. Everything has some sort of measure of doubt or variability to it, which has been incredibly interesting. I think what happens is how we define fact versus opinion. The other tricky part about fact versus opinion is that somebody's strong-held opinions feel like facts to them. You know, they feel that that's a factual truth for them. So anything opposite from their opinion to them feels like a lie. And when you talk about men and women, especially in this day and age where biological sex and gender and all of the things that go into those definitions are so visibly in play right now, it's a slippery slope to walk. I'm not one to moderate what I say. I've gotten better about it. I spend a lot of time deleting comments before I post them on social media because you can delete a post, I guess, but you can't take back something you say once it's fallen into the ears of somebody that heard it. It becomes a part of the rhetoric. I just preface that because we're getting into now lies that there are people out there who really feel are true. Not surprisingly, religion plays a huge role in this reality. People who firmly believe in their religions believe that all the religious teachings are fact, and they live by those things as being true. And, what's true for a Catholic is very, very different than what's true for a Buddhist. And they both believe that what they believe is true, or that's their truth. And there's just a lot that's gone into this episode. I apologize if it's all over the place, but it will be. So I'm going to start talking about my life and some of the lies I believed about myself and how much they still affect me in my relationships to this day. So I was born in 1963, which is the last official year of the baby boomer generation. I do not consider myself a boomer. I consider my parents to be boomers. Kenny is a bit of a boomer. He was born in 1955. I really resonate and reflect on the Gen X generation because I was the older kid in that generation. When I look at, riding my bike all hours of the night, playing kick the can at the park and, watching the Brady Bunch on Friday nights on TV, all of these things that were a part of my life. And then as I got older, like in high school, being a latchkey kid, coming home after track practice to get dinner ready before my dad got home from work because my mother was at the hospital working. I look at all of the things in my life and I see that a lot of what I hold as true is much more Generation X based than baby boomer based. So are the boomers wrong? Are the Gen Xers wrong? Are the millennials wrong? Are the Gen Zers wrong? Who's right? Who's wrong? And the biggest thing that I learned out of this was it exists for us. And this was in an article. I will have a list of all the articles that I looked at for this episode in my show notes. But we only know truth as it exists for us. This is absolutely right. So for a child born in a tribal community in the middle of the jungle, truth for that child is going to look very different than a child born in the Lower West Side of Manhattan. Because everything they see, everything they take in with their eyes, listen to with their ears, taste with their mouths, smell with their nose, feel with their hands, sense with their intuition, right, is based on their reality, their environment, what they're told, what they see in front of them. One of my favorite parts of being a mom or a parent in general is watching babies explore their world because all they have is what they see. So they pick something up, now they've touched it, and they put it in their mouth. That's the first thing they do. Everything they do that goes in their mouth. It's their initial way of experimenting with their environment. This is why I have to be careful when you have babies. They put all sorts of things in their mouth. We use our environment and what our environment tells us to establish our version of truth. This gets very, very tricky when it comes to running a country, to running a school district, to raising a family. We all have to figure out a way to live our truth without stepping on the toes of somebody else's truth. And sometimes this isn't possible. And when that's not possible, my opinion is that neither of those things are true, because an absolute truth would essentially be acceptable somehow by everybody. So I guess an example of absolute truth is that rainwater makes you wet. It does. You can cover your body with plastic. Now it makes the plastic wet. But when rain touches something, rain is made of water. Water makes things wet. I don't think anyone in the world would argue that point. There's some sort of black and white truth that water makes things wet. Ta-da! Most of life, however, isn't that simple. So in 1963, with two parents who were raising me, born in 1942, in the middle of the 60s, which from 1960 to 1970, the world could not have looked any more vastly different. I was raised in a very, very dichotomous environment. We had the traditional stay-at-home mom, full-time dad, going to work every day. My mother was in charge of the house. My mother was in charge of us. My dad left in the morning, came home at night, ate dinner, and then sat down and watched TV, and then went to bed. Early on, I felt like he was a wonderful dad, and he did a lot of things with us. He took care of the house. He mowed the lawns. He, did repairs, all of that sort of thing. But it was traditional. It was a traditional upbringing. I've talked before about my child abuse. As a very intuitive child, I was aware far sooner than I could articulate that there was internal pressure in my house, that things didn't always appear as they seemed. I had a grandmother who was viciously mean to my mother, very, very staunch in her belief that women should be subservient to men, that it was their job. I taught my older brother this, and not to trash my older brother, he's a wonderful human, but there were so many times in my life that everything deferred to him and he deferred to him. And I was essentially told that I was a little girl and that I should just put up with this. There's a funny little poem that I learned from this very grandmother that I've said before. What are little boys made of? What are little boys made of? Snakes and snails and puppy dogs' tails. That's what little boys are made of. This fascinated me. I didn't like snakes too much, but I knew they were slithery and deceitful and sneaky, and they could hide. Snails were a bit more fun. Saw them at the beach, stuck on rocks. If you pulled them off the rock, the slug that lived in the snail would ooze out. Slugs I thought were disgusting. So what does that mean? Snails look cute on the outside, but they're gross on the inside. And puppy dog's tail. So first of all, I love puppy dogs. So I picture the whole puppy dog with a waggy tail. But did that mean you cut the tail off to make a boy? I pictured this big witch's cauldron with these ingredients getting stirred up and all these little boys flying out. So that fascinated me. So I remember hearing this poem from my grandmother because I got in trouble I was wearing a dress that she had made for me. She was an amazing seamstress. And I believe I got mud or dirt on it. I was playing outside and she scolded me for getting it dirty. And I pointed out that my brother got dirty all the time. Why didn't she yell at him for getting dirty? And this was the poem that she read. So what are little girls made of? What are little girls made of? What are little girls made of? Sugar and spice and everything nice. That's what little girls are made of. Okay, so sugar's yummy. I used to eat it by the spoonful. My favorite sandwich growing up was spread butter on bread, sprinkle sugar on it, fold it in half, a butter sugar fold. Delicious. Sugar and spice, so spices. So I love cinnamon. Wasn't such a fan of garlic at the time. Turmeric, rosemary, curry. Spices are a wide variety, but that isn't the spice that came to mind. It was more like cinnamon. And everything nice. Well, there's a vague sentiment. Can't picture everything nice like you can picture a puppy dog's tail, amputated or otherwise. But the basic message here was that my job as a little girl was to be sweet, maybe a little spicy, but nice. That's what little girls were made of. And I tried to picture those things going into a pot and little girls coming out. When I first began school, we had to wear dresses to school still. And nobody was smart enough back then for us to wear shorts underneath them. In the winter, I wore tights most of the time because, your legs got cold. The number of times I went out to recess in a winter coat, hat, and mittens and boots, but like tights on my legs, like not even snow pants. And this was sort of considered okay. Bizarre to me now that we were just dressed so differently. But the gist of it was that when schools were sort of invented, mostly boys went to school and they played outside at recess. Oftentimes in sort of Midwestern farm days, westward expansion days, when boys and girls went to school, the boys went out and shoveled and did all this outside stuff, and the girls took care of the inside of the school. Those messages were strong for me. And based on my grandmother's strong insistence that they were correct, I had to moderate my behavior quite a bit when I went to her house. I had to be very mindful of what I said. More than once, something I said caused a fight. I learned very quickly that silence probably was the best way to go. And that was just that. Going off to school and then watching little boys do things at school and get in trouble, and little girls never doing those things. And then when little girls did do those things, getting in more trouble or being made a big example of, it was just puzzling to me. It was just puzzling that, yes, I understood boys and girls were different. And we are. Let me be clear. There is nothing the same in many, many aspects of boy-bodied people and girl-bodied people. We are designed to be different because that's the whole scientific way of promulgating the species, right? If you want the human race to exist, you have to reproduce. So you have to have healthy male-bodied people and healthy female-bodied people. You have to work together to create a new life, and then you have to make sure the new life doesn't die. This is a perfect segue into the next piece of my thoughts on girls and the lies we're told. So all through growing up, I felt I had to conform to a specific agenda. I remember when it changed and girls could now wear pants to school. I think I wore pants to school every day of the week. I loved it. I loved it. Wearing a dress became more of like a nice sunny day thing, or maybe a picture or something like this. But pants became a much bigger staple of my wardrobe. I remember strongly, and this is something my mom did for me that I'll never forget. It was a freezing cold day and I wanted to wear a dress. For some reason, I wanted to wear it, but I knew I would be so cold. And my mother said, well, just wear pants under it. I know what it was. It was brownies. I was a brownie. That's the youngest form of Girl Scouts at school. So I had my brownie uniform on, which of course was a dress, and I was freezing, and I just knew I'd be freezing. And my mom's like, just wear a pair of pants under it. So I had these royal blue and white sort of checkered pants that I loved. And so I wore those. And I remember we had a picture taken. There I am sitting cross-legged with my warm blue pants on. Not surprisingly, that brownie meeting took place in the basement of Dewey School, which is where I attend every school board meeting, because that's the SAU office now. That was sort of the bridge for me between being appropriately female, wearing my thin cotton brownie uniform, and then allowing myself the freedom to put a pair of pants on and sit cross-legged at school and not worry about my underwear showing. In the process of me growing up in Concord, New Hampshire, as a child, really growing up in the 70s, in 1970, I turned 7. So that's when my childhood really started to expand outside my home. I had several activities I did that I didn't notice a difference in how boys and girls were treated. Singing in the choir at church and youth group. Now, we were definitely told that boys and girls had different functions and roles in society, and a lot of those were dictated by what was just sort of accepted as normal. I was also taught, and I grew up in the Episcopal Church, that not all girls were the same and not all boys were the same, and that sometimes our thought processes, our athletic abilities, our interests could cross over, and that was wonderful. That's how the human race remained diverse and healthy and strong. You know, when you look at dog breeders that use the same 2 dogs to breed puppy after puppy and you get some inbred going on, you realize all sorts of unhealthy things happen, right? You need to have a wide variety of humanity to create a healthy, wide variety of humanity. And this is just on a biological level, quite honestly. By the time I got to middle school, sports became a bigger piece of my vernacular. And I was quite asthmatic. And so I couldn't do a lot of sports, or I didn't think I could do a lot of sports. My asthma accelerated in intensity once my child abuse started, which isn't surprising. Asthma can be very, very psychosomatic. Now, let me be clear. Psychosomatic is often thought of as something that's fake. She doesn't really have a headache. It's all in her head. Or she's not really sick. It's psychosomatic. Symptoms from illnesses that are caused by psychological stress are very real. You're not unsick. It's simply caused by an emotion and a hormone and an adrenal process in your body rather than a virus or a bug. So if you're vomiting because you're afraid, the vomit is no less vomit than it was if you had a stomach flu. Vomit be vomit, right? I remember being at the doctor's office, and I loved my pediatrician. He was a wonderful human being. But my asthma had gotten out of hand, and this particular asthma attack happened when I was in 5th grade at Kimball School. We were doing the president's physical fitness test, and it was the 600-yard dash. And it was in the big playground outside of Kimball School, and I was way ahead of everybody, like a half a lap ahead, and I finished. And then I collapsed and had this massive asthma attack. And I ended up missing like 2 weeks of school. Because back then they didn't have preventative medicine. There was no inhaler that you took before you ran. There were no steroid inhalers to prevent inflammation. Asthma was treated symptomatically. You took a Tedrol and it made you shake because it was full of epinephrine. If that didn't help, if the asthma was so far gone now that you couldn't take the Tedrol, Then you had to go to the ER and get an epinephrine shot, which often made me throw up and shake and my heart pound. But it opened up my lungs. It would open up the lungs. It would stop the wheezing. So the doctor was in the hospital and he said to my mother and to me, you really need to avoid physical activity. It clearly is a trigger for your asthma and isn't something you should be doing on a regular basis. He then said to my mother, you're lucky she's a girl. She'll be much easier to maintain. And I was puzzled by that because I really enjoyed running. Now, I wouldn't run again until I discovered it in high school. But I asked my mother when he left, why does he mean it's better that I'm a girl with asthma than a boy with asthma? And my mother simply said, because boys are expected to be athletic. And so if you were a boy, it would be a bigger deal that you can't do sports than if you're a girl. So that didn't sit right with me, quite honestly. Nor do I think it sat right with my mother, because I was always researching activities I could do that didn't create an asthma attack. I climbed mountains. By the time I was, 14 years old, I'd climbed probably 20 of the 4,000 footers. So clearly hiking was something I could do. I cross-country skied. No, I didn't necessarily get super out of breath cross-country skiing, but it was certainly cardiovascular, and I would spend hours in the woods with my friend Suzanne cross-country skiing. I joined swim team at the Y. Now, I was worried about chlorine and the fumes of chlorine, and I will say my swim team years were at the height of my child abuse, and I had massive fear over my mother not coming to get me when swim practice was over. I'd sob uncontrollably if she were late. If it were my dad picking me up, I'd get all anxious and nervous. I was living in such a perpetual state of vigilance and fear at that time that I think anything would have made me wheeze. I do know, however, that I had many, many swim practices and swim meets where I was quite fine. But I didn't stay with it. I got really, really sick in middle school. So then I'm going through puberty now. So this is where lies told to girls can become much more profound. So because I had been sexually abused, I felt that I was disgusting and dirty, that my vagina was evil. I got in trouble once for peeing outside or having my pants down outside and was really, really scolded and castigated for being inappropriate and outside. And so I learned right away that what was in your pants was evil and should be kept secret. One of the first things you learn now in helping children, particularly little girls, but little girls and boys both, from becoming groomed by predators, sex predators, and traffickers, is to be super comfortable identifying your body parts and what they're for, and that they are yours to manage. I had none of that. I had a mother trying to teach me to stand up for myself, while at the same time, the man she was married to was molesting me. So the conflict there was huge and just perpetuated the internal lie I had that I was the problem, that I was disgusting, that I was gross, that I must have somehow asked for this. I get to high school and I announced to my coach that I want to get a full scholarship for running because I'm suddenly a really good runner. And Coach Ludi had to tell me at the time that the NCAA didn't represent women, only men, that there were no scholarships for women. Now, this changed. Obviously, my freshman year in college was the first year that women received scholarships. However, that didn't create necessarily acrimonious and equal opinion around male and female athletes. That's another podcast for another time. But I did learn that I damn well better be grateful for this athletic scholarship that the NCAA gave me, because it came at great cost to many male athletes. And this I understand. And the problem with the initial implementation of Title IX was it was the government telling a bunch of institutions it did not fund how to behave. And it was the right message. If you're going to have a co-ed institution, you need to offer in equal measure what you offer to both boys and girls, male-bodied people and female-bodied people. You have to be equitable there. I learned, yes, I earned this, I deserved this, but I also earned I better be grateful. Now, gratitude, I think, is something we all should practice, but not grateful that I get to go to college on a scholarship because someone else can't, because that's not right. And it was set up incorrectly. And it wasn't fair to a lot of male athletes that this is how Title IX was set up. My participation shouldn't have cost a guy his participation. But women have been marginalized in every culture, in every skin color, in every country, in some manner, forever. Much more in politicized and Western cultures. Eastern culture and tribunal and indigenous cultures tend to understand the importance and value of what each gender or sex brings to the full picture. And when you have one group trying to control the masses, what's going to be considered true is what will help them continue to control the masses. When I asked the question on my Facebook page, so many of the answers I got on lies you were told as a little girl or a woman had to do with our bodies and with our place in society. The first one is our bodies. There are so many lies told about female bodies. I read an article about manipulating science. So manipulating science to reinforce established dogma, and that this is prevalent in cultures even now. Manipulate science. So one of the biggest lies that I found was told to women about women was that we have limited heartbeats in our body and limited brain power. And men have more than women. So men can use it and use both at the same time, and they'll be fine. But women should not use too much of their brains or exert themselves too physically, because they'll stop being able to have babies. So if you're having your period, don't go to school. Well, I missed a lot of school for my periods because I was bleeding like a stuck pig and I couldn't stand up. So part of me thinks, yeah, we should take better care of ourselves physically when we're menstruating. However, other than feeling like shit, losing blood wasn't making me not be able to learn, nor was I damaging my body. But those are some prevalent things that were taught to keep women from wanting too much to go to college or to exert themselves in athletics. I read a book, I listened to parts of chapters of a book called All in Her Head, and it's all about issues with femaleness that are often considered true that aren't. And they're myths, and so I'll go through some of these myths. This book was written by Elizabeth Coleman. So myths, that female bodies are vulgar. This resonated with me because of how I felt about myself as a child after being molested. I felt disgusting. I just felt gross. I burned my clothes. That's how gross I felt. That female bodies are vulgar, that menstruation is dirty. So this comes right from the Bible. Don't have sex with a woman if she is unclean. So unclean could mean a lot of things. Women are considered unclean if they've had more than one sexual partner, where men are not necessarily. But typically unclean would be directly related to having your period. Anxiety was often treated by having teeth pulled. So when women were too anxious or too emotional, pull their teeth. I don't know what that does. This was interesting. Women with an overactive sex drive were sent to mental asylums, and vibrators, dildos, were actually invented as a medical tool to calm down over-sexualized women. It's kind of creepy, right? But the theory was if they could get themselves off with the dildo or the vibrator, which wasn't considered a sexual pleasure thing back then, it was some weird thing that was wrong with women, that they would be less crazy. So no lie, it wasn't created as a sex toy. It was created as a way to manage women. I don't even know how I feel about that. I'd never heard of it until this book. And then women who spoke out, women who were too vocal and too opinionated, often had hysterectomies. And it's called a hysterectomy because hystera is the Greek word that was assigned to the uterus, the name the uterus. Hystera, hysteria. So it's the uterus that causes all this craziness. If you remove the uterus, if you take away the hysteria, the hysterectomy, then the woman would calm down. Those things were commonly believed hundreds of years ago. It's a little alarming and mortifying. There was another group that believed that the uterus traveled around in the body. So if a woman was like thinking crazy thoughts, her uterus must be in her head. And if she were vomiting, it must be up here. Like, I don't know. These were sort of crazy things that I glanced over a bit. I didn't read too deeply. It's too much. Myth number one, medical realities. So in our modern day culture here, myth number one is that heart disease is not a predominant killer of women. Heart disease is the number one killer of women. But in the media, you hear, when you think of who dies from heart disease, we all think of men having their widowmakers, having their heart attacks. And that's because all the research has been done on men, and all of the publications around the research on heart disease and cardiovascular illness is written about men. So the automatic connection is that, oh, heart disease is men. A bigger piece of the reason why more women die from heart attacks than men is because they get misdiagnosed. The first thing that's often assumed when a man goes into a hospital with classic heart attack symptoms are heart attack. Women are often accused of being stressed out, over anxious, or how are things at home? Here, take a Valium. So oftentimes the reason women die is because of medical misdiagnosis. My niece works in a medical testing lab, and she said that the reason they don't use female mice and rats is because it's too hard to control them because of their periods, their menstrual cycles, their reproductive cycles. Well, taking the time to test things on female lab rats, not that I like the idea of testing things on rats, but would certainly keep female-bodied humans, those of us with ovaries and uteri and all that, healthy, would be helpful because we would know how those medications affected us. A smaller dose, because we're smaller in stature, doesn't mean it's healthy for us or that it will work the same way. So medically speaking, there are lots and lots of myths about women that our bodies react the same way to things. They completely do not react the same way to things. The major function of a male body is to maintain strength and power and virility. Now, I'm speaking completely biologically here. The male version of any species is meant to fertilize an egg. Let's take love and romance and society out of it and how we feel about ourselves. Without a sperm and an egg, there's no more new baby. So the job of the sperm body is to make sure that healthy sperm body can create healthy sperm, right? The female body is designed to maintain the ability to grow and feed an infant. Before modern technology and formula and such, if you couldn't feed your baby, you had to find someone that was nursing to feed your baby. If you couldn't deliver a baby healthy, you died in childbirth. So there are so many medical interventions that can remove us from remembering the very basic truths about the human bodies. Male and female bodies are very different medically. Obviously, this triggers Molly's death for me because I firmly believe if she had been a 12-year-old boy just about to turn 13 with headaches and vomiting, they would have done a CAT scan immediately because they would have assumed, oh, he must have hit his head. They didn't assume that with her. Myth number 2, that estrogen and progesterone are only female hormones and testosterone is only a male hormone. Both male and female bodies rely on both things, right? Just differently. So testosterone is the primary sex hormone in male-bodied people, and it does to the human body what that body needs to create healthy sperm. Estrogen and progesterone are the conductors of the reproductive dance inside female bodies. However, testosterone also causes a release of estrogen. So females have testosterone, just much lower levels. This became really helpful to me when I was reading about ways to mitigate menopause symptoms. I thought that, okay, I'm losing estrogen. Does that mean the testosterone in my body is taking over or the progesterone? What I didn't know is that by lifting weights, I'm generating a testosterone response in my body that causes my body to create estrogen to balance it out. Amazing. So yeah, they're not completely male or female hormones, but women have much higher levels of estrogen, and estrogen performs a whole lot of functions in the female body that it doesn't in the male body. Myth number 3, women's health is only about reproduction. Well, let me be clear, men don't really have reproductive health issues other than, are their sperm live, right? Are there swimmers in there or are they, sterile? And lots of things cause male sterility, cancer and all that sort of thing. Definitely the health of a male and the effect that your overall physical health has on sperm is an issue, but not nearly to the extent of female health because so many things factor into reproduction. So as an athlete, I learned right away about the female athlete triad, which is weight and hormones and your menstrual period. And so women who work out a lot, you lose a lot of weight, you lose body fat, you gain muscle, and you can get to a point where your period stops. So that's not necessarily healthy. And this is hugely variable among females. I was skinny when I started my period. I weighed 88 pounds. So I never got skinny enough as a distance runner to not have a period because I would have had to get below 88 pounds. And I never got that light. Once I was, in college, I was sometimes in the 90s. But if I was close to weighing under 90 pounds, I was sick, like having my tonsils out or something. Physical health, body mass, body composition, hormonal balance, nutrition, stress all play a much bigger part of female reproductive health than men. However, women's health is a myriad of other things. And there are lists of illnesses that are often more prevalent in women than men. And a lot of them have been labeled psychosomatic. Fibromyalgia, for example. That one is connected to menopause and the drop in estrogen and progesterone in menopausal women, the drop in collagen, the drop in bone density. All of these things can factor into other illnesses. Way more women than men have illnesses like autoimmune illnesses related to the gut, celiac, and those sorts of things are far more prevalent in women. Not always diagnosed, but prevalent. So love science. So here's political science right here. A doctor can tell if a girl or a woman is a virgin. In the vagina, for those of you that don't know, there's a ring called the hymen. And it's like a thin sheath of skin. It has an opening because girls start their periods long before they have sex if they haven't been assaulted or had sex at a young age. It was common myth and political practice and remains so in many, many anti-female cultures. If the hymen is broken or stretched, that means the woman has had sex. I slipped on a balance beam in gymnastics and landed right on my crotch and had some pretty significant vaginal bleeding. I don't know about the intactness of my hymen at that time, but I do know that those types of things could cause hymeneal damage, and that didn't mean I had had sex or wasn't a virgin. And lots of women can have ample amounts of sex and still have a very intact hymen. So much of that, it's like thick hair versus thin hair, curly versus straight, light skin versus dark skin. So many things vary within race and gender that you can't pinpoint it and make it exact. That was out of a book called Don't Swallow Your Gum, which is a whole book of like myths around the body. Here's one: antibiotics make birth control unreliable. So this is one of those variable myths. I know when I got pregnant with the baby that I lost, I was on the pill. And I went off the pill once a year for a month. And I went off the pill that year and then had this massive period at the end of that month and then went back on the pill. And I got pregnant on the pill. And I had been on that pill for years and never gotten pregnant. I was on high dose antibiotics during the month of March when I conceived baby Gordy. I firmly believe that my antibiotic interfered with my birth control. There's conflicting evidence on that. My theory, and what I tell Gracie, is better safe than sorry. If you're taking any other drugs, read if they have interactions with birth control and go ahead and use a condom anyway, because why not be extra safe? But that's something that surprised me because I attribute my conception of baby Gordy to that. Here's a big one. Men and women need equal sleep. We can each function on the same amount of sleep. That's not quite true. Men can get by easily on 6 hours of sleep, 6+. Now, not everyone. There are men that need more. There are men that need less. Kenny can sleep 12 hours at a time. However, the physical illnesses related to lack of sleep are far less prevalent in men than they are in women. So 2 things about women's sleep. Once you've had a baby, there's this instinctiveness. I can be in a dead sleep. Jack makes one little noise and I wake right up. And I know I've been in a dead sleep because I'm not wide awake. I'm out of it, but I'm awake, intending to whatever he might need. The other night, he had sort of half fallen off the bed. So he was like leaning off the bed, holding his hands on the floor. His head was on the floor. Mama, mama. I woke right up and pulled him back up into bed and got him situated. But what happens with women is that they suffer physical reactions from the lack of sleep: high blood pressure, cortisol increase, tummy weight gain, all those sorts of things, insulation and inflammatory disease. Here's another myth, that menopause lowers your sex drive. Menopause does not lower necessarily a woman's desire for sex, but the lack of estrogen can make sex painful. So why would you want to do something that hurts? And then the sexual myths, oh my gosh, go round and round and round. So much religious belief teaches us that women who want to have sex are disgusting. We're not supposed to want it. And I'll get into those things in a minute when I talk about teaching at Concord High, when I taught health. Here's another big myth that's important. Women can't get pregnant during their period. There are lots of girls who believe this. Period blood is the lining of the uterus coming out. It's not like systemic blood from your arteries and veins. It's the lining of the uterus that has blood in it. If there is an egg in the period blood that is still in the uterus at the time that the person's menstruating and sperm gets in there, that egg can get fertilized. Oftentimes as well, ovulation happens close to the period. So then there are some funny ones, funny, alarming sort of. I remember being in Runlet and I just started my period, so I was 9th grade. And I didn't wear tampons for a long time because I didn't tell my mother I started my period. I didn't want anyone to know, especially my dad, even though he wasn't in the house anymore. I just knew my mother would tell everybody and I didn't want anyone to know. And so I didn't say anything for a long time. And I had horrible periods, giant blood clots. So I'd be sitting in class with a big fat pad on and I'd feel this rush of fluid come out of me, like a rush. And so I'd panic because I don't want to bleed through. I had this happen to me in a class once, and I went up and I said, I need to go to the bathroom. And the teacher said, it's only 3 minutes to the bell. Can't you wait? And I started to cry because I didn't know what to do. And I said, I don't think I can hold it. So I didn't let him know I was having my period because no way, no way. But he let me go. And I ran to the bathroom just in the nick of time. This memory came to my mind because there was a story on a BuzzFeed site of a girl saying that she was at the movies with her boyfriend and she got her period. So she said, look, I have to get up and go to the bathroom. I just started my period. And he was like, can't you hold it till the movie's over? You can't hold period blood. You can't squeeze your vagina and keep the blood in. It's not like a bladder. There's no sphincter in the vagina that is what holds the pee or the poop in, right? Urethra is, there's a little sphincter in there. There isn't one in the vagina. So no, once the period blood has come out of the uterus, it's heading out. There's no holding it. There was another story about a girl who said her boyfriend said she was so lucky that she got to get turned on every time she put a tampon in. Ladies don't feel all the things in their vaginas. That's not where sex feels good. And there are actually no nerve endings deep in the vagina because if there were, babies could never come out. So you don't feel the tampon when it's in there. You don't always feel it going in, quite honestly. At least not after you've used them a few times and have mastered that. But no, tampons don't turn us on, but thank you for thinking they do. And then this big one, period cramps are fake. I do remember reactions where I have said I have really bad cramps and being dismissed. Oh, it's just your period. Okay, well, I'm bleeding chunks out of my vagina. Yeah, it's just my period. And that might sound gross to hear, but for women that have incredibly crampy periods, there's nothing unreal about them. When I had Gracie, I was amazed at how similar period cramps were to contraction cramps. Well, that makes sense. If your uterus has to contract to get a big old blood clot out, that's what it's going to do. And that's what a contraction is. So that was a huge eye opener for me, just as a new mother at age 37, by the way, to feel these contractions and realize, oh, I've been feeling these my whole life. A really scary one was a politician in Washington talking about rape not being allowed as an exclusion for abortion. And he goes, I don't believe any woman that's pregnant can be raped. Their body has a way of turning all that off if it's a rape. Sperm don't wear little superhero shirts with a rapist sign on it saying, we're rapists. And the eggs know, and now they can put on a shield and not get impregnated. It's not how that works. Sperm is sperm, egg is egg. They meet, that's it. I remember that got a lot of news coverage on TV, but there were people that really truly believed that if a woman got pregnant, she had to have wanted to have the sex. So that was an alarming one. All right, so here's some body part stuff. Now, this goes into a lie being a deliberate mistruth, like a deliberate thing said to perpetuate something or to keep a secret, or something that just isn't true or isn't talked about. So I was always really honest and open with my cross-country girls when I coached them, because we're female athletes, and your period and the sore boobs and the weight gain and the tummy aches and all that goes along with having your period can play a huge role in your athletic performance. Also, for me, I know for me, when I was having my period, the ligaments in my pelvis got very mushy. I had this amazing physical therapist. I had this back injury and this hip and pelvis injury, and he was doing some manipulation on my back, and he's like, are you having your period right now? And I'm like, why? Did I bleed all over the table? He goes, no, I can tell because your body reacts really strongly to it. His advice to me, not to do super hard workouts or race when I was having my period. Now, flash forward like 40 years, when I was coaching at Bow High School, the athletic director there, Mike, not the athletic director that hired me, told me that I needed to stop talking to my female athletes about their periods. Apparently somebody had complained that I was very open about it. And I looked at him and I'm like, you want me to stop talking about girls having their periods? It's a physical, what are we, 1950? And he simply said, you need to stop talking about girls having their periods. Talk about perpetuating a myth that the period is some big, nasty, ugly thing. It's a body function. I digress. Back to things about the human body that we don't always know. Nipple hair. Yeah, chicks get hair around the nipples. It happens all the time. I pluck them, I shave them, whatever. I don't have as many as some. And women are very different in how they react to them. Some women get rid of them all, some women don't. Who knows? I didn't like them. And I know when I nursed my babies, if I had any nipple hairs, that it was irritating to Gracie, Molly, and Jack. So I take care of that. Not everyone does. It's just a hormonal thing. I grow chin hairs that are like 6 inches long. We grow hair in weird places. All vaginas are pink. Okay, so I've not looked at a million vaginas, but like anyone, skin hue and pigmentation varies from person to person. I also think from race to race, I think depending on your heritage and what you bring into your body genetically can play a role in that. Only skinny girls are sexy. Well, if skinny girls turn you on, then yeah, only skinny girls are going to be sexy for you. But when you look at the culture around beautiful women and you look at like ancient statues of women, they're always comely. There's always a little belly and weight on the hips and the bum, because in many, many cultures, a healthy, full-fleshed woman was a sign of life and beauty. And so that was what was wanted. America is a skinny, skinny, skinny culture where the thinner and fitter you are, the more attractive you are. At the same time, you must have giant boobs. So who knows? Another one, lying on your back is the best position for giving birth. Now, I've delivered all of my babies on my back. When it came time to push, that's where I was most comfortable. But I know that there are birthing stools that people give birth on their hands and knees, that people squat down and give birth standing up. There are many ways. It really all depends really personally on the female. The lying on your back to give birth took hold in America in the 50s and 60s when women were made unconscious and their babies were delivered while they were out from anesthesia. They would wake up and their baby might have been born for hours and hours. And they were whisked away to nurseries and given formula and all that. When we medicalized childbirth and took it out of the hands of women is when lying down on your back to give birth became prevalent. This is one that I didn't know until I started using tampons. And I expressed to a friend of mine how freaked out I was about using a tampon because you have to take it out every time you have to pee. And my friend kind of laughed at me and said, no, different hole. That's right. You have babies and have periods out of your vagina. You pee out of your urethra, which is located up where your clitoris is, up high. So the pee comes out a whole different place. The number of people who still don't really know this, and I can see why, breastfeeding is bad. That was a political agenda, I think, funded by the formula industry. It's amazing in America, especially, how much the pharmaceutical industry and the medical industry, money, perpetuates illness by promoting cures. And there was a whole generation of women who were told their breast milk was inadequate. Breast milk is amazing. When your baby gets sick, it changes and puts more antibodies in it. As your body grows older, it changes for the needs of a toddler versus the needs of a newborn. Your breast milk changes the time of day. Breast milk at night has melatonin in it, appropriate levels of melatonin for a baby, levels to make them sleep, whereas in the morning it doesn't. And it might not be melatonin, but it's something in the breast milk that helps a baby sleep. Oh, another one, this was perpetuated by a lot of male OBGYNs, that morning sickness doesn't really exist, especially doesn't exist after 12 weeks. Some of the horror stories I've heard of women vomiting months and months into their pregnancies and not being given anti-vomit medicine because it couldn't be morning sickness anymore. Shaving will make your hair grow back thicker. So this is what a lot of boys are told. If you want a thick beard, shave it every day. It will grow back thicker. Gentlemen, shaving will not give you a fuller beard. And ladies, shaving will not give you more crotch hair or more leg hair. It simply removes it for a while. It does grow back stubbly for a while. Period syncing is not true. So I lived with groups of women, and it always seemed to me after living together for several months that we all sort of started having our period at the same time. Now, I could remember that inaccurately because it was a thing, but I always felt like we either had 5,000 tampons in the bathroom or none, because we were either all having our period or we weren't. Hard to say. But in general, that's considered to be false. And then finally, that super heavy periods are normal. This is where normal comes into play now, because not everyone has super heavy periods. I know for me, when I was healthiest, my periods were relatively easy to deal with. Having said that, I spent a lot of my life on birth control, which moderates your period, makes it not so heavy. Birth control pills are often used for girls that have super heavy periods to calm them down. My perimenopausal symptoms were massive heavy periods in my 40s. I had an IUD put in with progesterone in it, totally calmed down those heavy periods. I think heavy periods are a normal part of human existence, but heavy periods themselves are not necessarily a normal function for a human body. If they're super heavy, something is going on. The womb is an animal within an animal. I talked about that. We try to censor the period, and we try to censor any conversation around menstruation in the female reproductive cycle. That athletic director 5 years ago telling me to stop talking about periods at sports practice with a team full of girls. Right, let's censor that now. Let's not talk about that crap. That belongs at home. Lots of things belong at home. Let me be clear. Public schools shouldn't be teaching religion, and they shouldn't be teaching a lot of things that they think they should be teaching. But when you're working with a group of girls over a physical activity that involves the health of their body functions become a part of it. And we need to take that out of gender identity and sexuality. A period's a period, no matter who's having it. That's a lot of periods right there. Another idea was humans. So, if you read the creationism story of Adam and Eve, Adam was here first, and then, God decimated his body and took a rib and made Eve. Men don't have one less rib than women, by the way. We've been taught from early on that we are somehow less than and subservient to and one step behind men. Men and women each have very important roles in the promulgation of the species, right? We both have to be here or no more humans arrive. A lot of the myths around women and girls come from the belief that we're just some extension of boys. A lot of myth will say that girls are just incomplete boys, that had all our sex organs come out, we would be boys. Well, there is a differentiated sexual development disorder, disorders of sexual development, DSD. And one of them is where you have female genitalia, or what looks like female genitalia, maybe no vagina, but definitely like lips and what looks like a girl outside. And then inside are testicles. So they did not descend. The process of a fetus going from female to male is very particular, and it takes a while. Lots of things can go wrong between the beginning of that process and the end. That's come into play quite a bit in a lot of issues around gender and gender identity. Only men have orgasms. female orgasms are a sign of craziness. They have nothing to do with sexual stimulation. And that was the whole who invented the dildo thing. That was amazing to me. Education and athletics. As society developed and more things became intellectual for both men and women, not just surviving in the frozen tundra, it became obvious that women could do a lot of things that they were told they couldn't. Women were smart, women could read, women could lift up bales of hay, women could do a lot of things alongside men. But the pervasive idea was that they ought not to do that too much because it will hurt them. It will hurt their primary function. Only someone that's never given birth to a child can think of women as unphysical or unathletic. That's impossibly difficult. And that's how babies come out. I mean, granted, there are C-sections, but any woman walking around that delivered naturally went through childbirth. And sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's not. But even easy, it's still a baby coming out of your body. Only sluts get cervical cancer. So let me be clear, a virgin could have sex for the first time with a guy who has HPV on his penis and get cervical cancer. You get it from someone. So yes, the more people you sleep with, the higher the likelihood that a penis with HPV on it will come into you. There's a book called The Vagina Bible. A lot of these things are written in that book as well. The whole patriarchy is built on the idea that vaginas are dirty. So teaching health at Concord High School, two things come into play for this one. I would always do a questionnaire the first day of class, and you did them handwritten and you passed them in without your name. I didn't want a name on them unless you wanted to put your name. The only thing I did was I gave boys one color paper and girls another color paper. So I would know if the answer was coming from a boy or a girl, because some of these questions, that was important to me. So it was all sorts of things. What role do you have in your family? Do you have siblings? Where do you fall in your family? Are your parents married or separated? Do you do athletics? What are your interests? All sorts of things like this. And then I would talk about the body. If you could change one thing about your body, what would it be? A pervasive amount of girls would say they wanted to lose weight. I wish I was smaller. I wish my boobs were smaller. I wish I was skinnier. I wish I was thinner. And the pervasive answer for boys was, I wish I was bigger. I wish I had more muscles. I wish I was stronger. So there was this generalized idea that big equaled boy and little equaled girl. And when you look at a lot of our advertising and what we tell snakes and snails and puppy dogs' tails, sugar and spice and everything nice, that makes sense, right? It was always interesting to me. And then I also would ask questions about sex. What's your opinion on someone who's had a lot of sex? And then they would say, well, it depends on if it's a boy or a girl. That was sort of a very common answer. So when I would do the sexuality unit, the first thing I would do is put a big soccer field on the whiteboard. I had like a felt soccer field and I'd put it up there. And I'd have team A and team B, boys and girls, but this wasn't evident at the time. And I'm like, all right, the game is soccer. Let's make a list of rules for team A. And we list all the rules of soccer for team A. And I'm like, all right, now let's make a rule for team B. And they look at me like, well, you don't need separate rules. The game is soccer. Same rules for both teams. And I'm like, are you sure? What if one team's higher skill? Shouldn't they have different rules? And I went around and around. No, it's the game is soccer. So then I would take the soccer field off the board and I'd put a big picture of a double bed up there. And I'd take the word soccer off and I'd put the word sex. I'm like, all right, so let's make a list of rules for boys. And I'd go through all the list of rules for boys. All right, now, there we go. We have the rules. No. And the list of rules for girls. And so I would have them be as honest as they dared to be publicly. But the bottom line at the end of that lesson is that girls should wait and save themselves. And if you had sex with a lot of guys, that meant you were like slutty and gross. And for guys, having sex was a conquest, a sign that you were virile, that you were the man. And that if you'd been able to convince a lot of girls to have sex with you, then you were like the go-to guy. They all were very honest and open with this. They all understood it and felt it. But not one of them had any idea at all how to change it, how to publicly vocalize that was this really fair? Like it takes two. A guy can't have sex with a girl if the girl isn't there to have sex with, right? So what's going on here, right? The other thing was, the question was, what are you most afraid of for the first time you have sex? And boys would always say that I don't do a good job, that I don't last a long time, all of that kind of stuff. And the girls' number one fear, that it will hurt. I hope it doesn't hurt too much. When girls are often told, keep your legs together, don't be that girl, don't be that slutty girl, let someone else be that. I remember eating dinner with some friends of mine, and one of my friends said, you'd be so proud of me. You know, my son had a date, so I gave him some condoms. And I'm like, so when your daughter goes on her first date, you're going to give her some condoms? And just sort of looked at me, and I'm like, she's the one that's going to get pregnant. Shouldn't she have the condoms? I mean, shouldn't she have them as well in case the boy doesn't? And is that the message you want to send? Oh, you're going on a date? Well, if you have sex, here's some condoms. These are those little pervasive things that just exist sometimes in our reality. One of the things that's really hard about discerning what's a lie and what's true about girls and women or between men and women is that the essential definition of a lie is that it's just a statement that is not true. A lie is simply something that isn't true, period. But that calls into play the definition of true. When you think of lies and why people tell them, all lies stem from some version of truth that people may be uncomfortable with. In true fashion of Barb, I did my Facebook, okay, people, 3, 2, 1, go, lies you were told about girls and women. I was told that I would be more appealing to a guy if I appeared simple-minded and naive. Shh, snakes and snails and puppy dogs' tails. Periods are no big deal. Okay, well, you've never had one then, or you've never had a really bad one. If a boy bullies you, it means he likes you. Okay, nobody bullying you means they like you on any level, period, 0, the end. Nobody bullying you is doing so because they like you. They're doing it because they want to see how you'll respond. That's it. Your body size equals your value, meaning the smaller you are, the more you're worth. So this came into play in a lot of answers. Being skinny. You would have gotten that role in the play if you weren't so big. Well, okay. Unless the character, his or her whole entire reality is based on their size, then that's just crap, right? It's your job to eat everything on your plate because there are starving children in other countries. Okay, well, I think boys and girls both were told this, but I do know that it is often the feminine nature to want to be a caretaker, to take care. And these messages, I have to eat. If I don't eat, I'm a bad person. A lady needs to know how to set a table properly. This was a huge one lectured to me. It was my job to set the table and set it properly. I'm not the only one eating at it. Why do I have to set it? That was always tricky for me. Like, what? Say what? No. And I do remember too, my grandmother, same grandmother, the one that lectured me about all the other things. I would sit with my elbows on my table. If you can see me, I'm doing it now. We would get scolded. Mabel, if you're able, get your elbows off the table. This is not a horse's stable. Rather, it's a dining table. Wow. Okay, so that one. Your BMI, your body mass index, the lower it is, the healthier you are. I did this amazing thing when I taught personal fitness at Concord High School. I had them do a BMI. I had them weigh themselves. I had them do blood pressure and heart rate, body fat percentage, which measures water in your body. And then you would combine all of these things. So height and weight, body type, mesomorph, endomorph, ectomorph. So all of these things, they fill out this whole thing. And then there was a formula. You put it all together to get the healthiest person. And it was how you ranked on each thing had a scale for like percentage of body fat and your weight for your height and a healthy heart rate and blood pressure and your body mass index and your body fat percentage. And you put it all together and you got a number. And I would have kids guess, who do you think the healthiest guy is in here? Always an athlete was chosen. Who's the healthiest girl? Always the skinniest girl. I would say 85% of the time, it was not the most athletic boy or the skinniest girl that was healthiest. And if it was, there were a lot of other factors that played into it other than them being thin. It was a really, really good lesson. It was a good lesson for boys. They didn't have to be too big. It was a good lesson for girls. They didn't have to be too small. So your body is a temple. I firmly believe that my body is a temple, but it's a temple for me. So I need to treat it the way I feel is best for it. I need to be kind to it. It's my job to care for it. It's not someone else's job to tell me what to do with it. This woman said, your body is a temple, so you need to keep it pure for marriage. That totally comes from religious doctrine that acceptable women were pure and unscathed. And if they got sexually assaulted, it wasn't the fault of the assaulter. Now you just aren't clean and pure anymore. So that's a tricky one, because I think if we treated our bodies like temples, we'd make better decisions for ourselves. Nothing to do with staying pure for marriage. Whistling isn't ladylike. I never heard that one. So my Grammy actually taught me to whistle, the same one that, told me not to put my elbows on the table. So I don't know about that. I'd never heard of that one. Being bossy will hinder your progress. Strong, forceful women are called bossy. There was two articles I read in the process of this, and it was the differences in criticisms of political speeches. When you have a man going on, like, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, they're considered great leaders, and they're forceful and firm, and they'll keep us safe. And when women give the same speech with the same verbal enunciations, they're called heady and bossy and full of themselves and erratic and out of control. And then there was another article that said, if sports articles were written about men, the same they were about women in terms of athletics. Michael Phelps' Speedo encased his body tightly So everything was visible to the eye. Okay, we don't ever talk about men's little teeny tiny Speedos that they used to wear in that regard, right? We talk about how fast he swam. But you watch a beach volleyball game or you watch a swimming and the first thing that's done to describe the female athlete is what her body looks like. Maybe not specific to the clothes, but with the male athletes, it's about what their bodies do. They're powerful, they're fast, they're strong. With women, it's how they look doing it. And I remember I had a big article written about me, and I was described as diminutive and demure on the outside. And then you watched me race, and I was anything but. Okay, why does the fact that I'm quiet on the outside, which if you know me, I'm not, matter? They were trying to talk about how little my stature was, how little I was. How can anything little be so fierce? Okay, you've never been around a rabid squirrel. They're not big, but they're fierce, I'll tell you. If you weren't married by 21, you're going to be a spinster. So a spinster was a negative word for a single woman. This is a classic throwback to women only have value if they're attached to a man. Not so. Lots and lots of single women who've never been married, lots of women married to women, right? So your value is not necessarily assigned to a man. And this is sort of your traditional patriarchal culture, which, let me be clear, there are elements of a patriarchal culture that are fine. It's only when the patriarchy dictates everything that it becomes unfine. When I look at men and women, I think of a bird, and each wing of the bird, one's a male, one's a female. They both have to be equally strong or that bird can't fly. So taking away judgment, we can't put males above females because now you've got one big wing and one small wing. It's like Nemo with the gimpy fin, right? It's not going to work. I grew up heavy and I was called big boned. Okay, that's a polite way of saying you're big, I guess. There's a really good song, The Big Bone Girl from Southern Alberta. You just couldn't call her small. I don't remember who sang it. Oh, a friend of mine wrote a story about how her boyfriend showed up and she couldn't wait to see him and she hadn't done her hair or makeup yet. And she sprinted to the front door to greet him. And her mother made her go back upstairs and finish getting ready because she wouldn't want him to see her like that. This brought me back to my college days where I had these college roommates. I was a sophomore and they were seniors. And when they had a guy over, they had me set my alarm to wake them up so they could get up and like fix their makeup and stuff and then get back into bed before the guy woke up. And that was like stunning to me. Like, wow, they're going to see you that way anyway, but they made themselves up so they could be as beautiful as possible when they went out. And that's the version of themselves they showed. I think it's one of the reasons I got really anti-makeup pretty early on is this is who I am. I don't need to pretty myself up. Some of you might disagree, but I look the same way waking up as I do right now. Well, a little puffier maybe. A non-vaginal delivery means you have never given birth. Nope, it just means you haven't given birth out of your vagina. I've never had my gut cut open and a baby pulled from it. That's a method of giving birth I've never, ever had done to me or had to recover from. So in my mind, you grow a baby and now it's out of you, you've given birth. Don't wear revealing clothing because if you get attacked, it'll be your fault. You're sending a message that you want to be attacked. This was another wonderful lesson when I taught health. I would talk about boys before a party. Oh, we're having a kegger at my apartment. And while they're setting up the keg and getting ready for the apartment, all the boys are getting drunk already, pre-gaming and shooting pool and having fun and all of this. The girls are all getting ready and they're not thinking, oh, I'm going to wear this low-cut shirt so I can turn on Steve. It's going to be, I'm going to wear this low-cut shirt so my boobs look bigger than Susie's. Very often when you get into the nature of why girls dress the way they do or pretty themselves up, it's in competition with other women. It's not to impress the men. If it were an event that were all women, they would still get just as dressed up. They would want to look just as beautiful for all the women in the audience. Now, eyes are one of our senses, and our eyes tell us things. So if I were to walk down the street and I saw two women, one in a very low-cut shirt and a miniskirt, and one in an Amish outfit, I would immediately assume two very different things about them based upon what they were wearing. However, so many of my assumptions would come from what I've learned about what those things meant. Bottom line is, I can wear what I want. And if you want to know what message I'm sending, then ask me to verbalize it. Don't make assumptions based on what you see. The whole issue behind burqas and women having to cover themselves in other cultures is putting the responsibility on them to prevent sexual assault. Takes all responsibility off the men. Because a burqa-clad woman who's sexually assaulted goes to jail just like the miniskirt woman does in those cultures. So yeah, but that's a pretty common one too. We don't ask people who had their houses robbed what color their house was painted or what style furniture they had in there. You know, oh, really? You have expensive furniture? Well, no wonder you got robbed. You're sending a message that you're available to be robbed. You know, that never happens. That was another health lesson for me as well. So back to body types and how only skinny people are sexy and beautiful. I have a friend who is a long, tall drink of water. And she's in her 60s now, and she's stunning. She's tall, she's long-limbed, not as skinny as she used to be, but by any classification, skinny. And pictures of her when she was younger, she was quite athletic, gorgeous. And her mother would perpetuate that because of how she looked in clothes, how her body moved through space, she was quite athletic, very graceful, that she was clearly sexually active and clearly slutty. And this was drilled into her. So talk about a girl who, had she really taken that to heart, tried to eat herself into obesity to somehow please her mother, right? A lot of eating disorders center around hiding in or getting rid of our bodies. I wanted to disappear. So my eating disorder behaviors were centered completely around staying in the hospital so the doctors would protect me and disappearing so I couldn't be found. Yeah, you have to be skinny and beautiful because that's what we consider sexy. But once you are, then you're sexy. So obviously you're loose or trampy. Two wrongs don't make a right. So this was right after, if a boy is bullying you, it's just because he likes you. You know, Johnny keeps teasing me, he trips me, dumps my books. Well, that means he likes you. No, dump his books back, you know. So the two wrongs don't make a right. And it was specific to this girl standing up to a bully who was a boy who kept bullying her. And she finally got him to stop by dumping his books. She got in trouble, became an issue. The teacher told him to stop picking on her. That's a pretty pervasive. Yeah, two wrongs don't make a right, but it doesn't mean you should let someone abuse you. Burnt toast will make your hair curly. This woman has really super curly hair, so she's like, maybe it worked. Must mean she ate a lot of burnt toast. I don't know. So many of the misconceptions around girls and what we've been told in boys is knowing our place. Know your place. And it goes back to, are you a snake, a snail, and a puppy dog's tail? Or are you sugar, spice, and everything nice? Because snakes and snails and puppy dogs all exist outside in the world, and they run around, and they're allowed to be who they are in the world. And sugar and spice sit on a shelf in a kitchen. So if you want to take that poem literally, so many myths perpetuated against women are based on that foundational belief that we have to be a certain way. And I think this is why I'm so committed to honest and safe conversations around gender identity, sexuality, because we cannot assume that one version of human needs to be a certain way to appease another version of human. And that's where really, really meaningful conversation comes into play. And I think it's why I'm talking about lies, because it's human nature to use lies to perpetuate agendas. And we always, always need to seek the truth. When I Googled lies girls are told, I'm just a social drinker. So this is a very, very common, I've used it in my own alcohol struggles. Well, I drink socially, I only have one or two. These are like self-lies, lies you're telling yourself to perpetuate a reality. You look great in those. So this is my mother. And I know that she was trying to be kind to me. When I was little, I was so skinny. When I had finally come clean about my abuse and thought that I had people on my side more than I did, I would get a new outfit for school. And I was so skinny, it would hang off me. And my mother would say, you look great. Those look really good on you. Yes. And she always want to look at my butt. Yep, your butt looks great, blah, blah, blah. And 6 or 7 months later, I might come down wearing that same outfit. Maybe I'd grown or put on some weight. She would say to me, you look so much better in that now. I mean, last year it just hung off you. And I'd look at her like, so which is the lie, Mama? Is it the lie that I looked good in it a year ago, or is the lie now? Because you lied to me. So do I just not look good in anything? It really, we had some arguments about this. Backhanded compliments that so many girls can get and so many manipulative people will say. Fake apologies. So I get very frustrated when people in my life apologize to me and then do the very same thing again. So are you sorry that you did it and it upset me? So you're sorry about my response? Or are you truly sorry about your behavior? You'll make an amend to fix it. Two very different things. Doesn't mean all I'm sorries are not meaningful. It simply means sometimes it goes deeper. Sometimes what you're sorry for isn't what the person needs to hear. The final thing I'll do to close this up would be that women and lots of marginalized communities are expected to stay quiet. Be quiet. It's more ladylike to be quiet. You don't want to cause a ruckus. And I think that's probably the most unsafe thing we can tell anybody, is to be quiet if something makes us uncomfortable. The Me Too movement was all around child sexual abuse. And while way too many boys get abused sexually as children, it is far more prevalent for a girl to be the victim of sexual assault than a boy. And we are told to be quiet. All of the training around preventing it and becoming less of a quote unquote easy victim, of course, that puts the responsibility on the victim, doesn't it? But predators look for easy prey. Hawks don't circle around and look for a small lynx that can run through the forest. They look for a little animal that might be slower moving, easier to get, right? They want prey that's gettable. And oftentimes, vulnerable people are prey for people seeking power. And it's all too often this happens with little girls being the prey. Let's look at female and male clothing. When I get shirts for Jack, they have like astronauts, and if they have animals, it's wolves and dinosaurs, monsters, right? Little girls' shirts, they have little fluffy bunnies and flowers and pretty little soft kitty cats, right? Predators and prey. We set up this idea that this is how it works. Men are far more predatory than women because if you put a group of people in a jungle, the likely hunters and foragers would be the men, and the likely caretakers would be the women. It's just biological in nature. In a modern day society, it's not so necessary, right? I do a lot of the physical work around my house because my 8 years older than me, kidney transplanted husband sometimes can't manage this task. I can manage it better. That's all. Does it mean I should sit around and wait for him to do it? No. It means that he takes care of the kitchen because he's a great cook and he can focus on that task while I go mow the lawn or snow blow the driveway or do those things that require a bit more muscle power. If I had to end this on one thing, it's that little girls and women and those who love them should not be told to be quiet. So we have to be willing to listen, and we need to give little girls and women the confidence to trust their instincts. And if a fact being presented as truth makes your tummy knot up or doesn't feel right, then talk about it. And if as a society, we punish those who speak out because we think they're speaking out against something that goes against what we believe, that's a problem. And that happens quite a bit in educational settings right now, in the political settings around a variety of topics. That if you say you're wrong, if you say that makes you uncomfortable, then you're somehow a bigot or a phobe. Anything I've preached on here is my opinion, based on my experience. I'm not telling you how to be. And you might disagree with a lot of what I say. I do know in current political culture, little girls and women have to be supported in speaking up when they feel uncomfortable. That's just that. We have to support that. I told you these little lie truth episodes are going to get heavier and deeper and a bit more tricky, but that's the beauty of it. Good conversation should make us uncomfortable. We need to sit with people that we think disagree with us and have a conversation and learn about each other. And sometimes agree to disagree and compromise and meet in the middle if we can. That's the reality. Thank you for listening to all of this. I know I can ramble on and repeat words and clear my throat. It's the nature of Barb. Be good to yourself, honor the body in which you live, and treat it the way you think it should be treated. Be good to someone else, respect who they are and what they need. And as always, have a good day, everybody. Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at barb_444. On Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.